Okay, so yeah, as Bob said, I'm a member of HPS Law Group. I'm the P in HPS Law Group. And we are a smaller firm in Mesa. We focus on business and intellectual property. A little about me. I'll try to make this go fast. We're a smaller group. I really want to make this useful for you guys so I can answer any questions. So I'll go through the stuff that I want to say as quickly as I can, and then as many questions as you can ask, we'll give you as much free law advice as we can before we run out of time here. So I'd love to do that if we have time to do it. So I got my law degree from Arizona State University. I grew up here mostly. I got an undergraduate degree in biochemistry at Brigham Young University. So I do mostly intellectual property law. I have a background for patents, so I do a lot of that. At HPS Law Group, our niche is sort of where you guys are right now. We like startups, we like early phase companies that are growing. So Brint Hiatt is our partner. He has the most experience with business law and venture capital stuff. So he will do a lot of that. Bert Skiba and I both have a patent background, and so we do a lot of intellectual property and also know enough about the business law things to be dangerous and help out, and we do what we can. So on this slide, you can just see some of the stuff. We used to have business first, but then since I'm doing this presentation, we put intellectual property first because I like it more. One of the things we really like to do on that right-hand side, we have a monthly plan that we do for new companies who have legal issues that come up frequently and are on a budget in that they want to know how much they're spending every month. We can do a monthly plan where, you know, whatever comes up during that month, we can handle it, and you don't have to worry about the bill for any of those things. So any contract reviews, anything like that, you can bring it to us. We like to be like an outside general counsel. So bigger companies have a lawyer that does all those things. If you're not big enough to have that, if you can rent one, that's what we would like to be by those kind of programs. So if that's anything you want to do, we'd like to do that. So what we wanted to talk about today is whether or not you need a business entity, and if you do, which kind of entity you want. And this is a pretty Googleable subject. You can find a lot of information on this. You know, just Google what do I need to start a business and what kind, and there's a lot of information there. It's all presented in the exact same way. So I'm trying to take a little bit of a different tack, and I'm hoping it'll help you remember it better. So what I want to start out with sort of is to get at what a business is. And so I'm going to talk about, at the beginning, I'm going to talk about a corporation, what corporations are. And by corporation, what I mean is something that is considered different from the people that make up the business. So a separate entity. A business or a corporation really is just a legal fiction. They don't really exist. It's something we pretend exists that is separate from the people inside them to give certain benefits to those people. So I wanted to just show real quick if this is going to play. Let's see. There you go. So your business is people. Not in the sense, I don't want to get into whether your business is, you know, the personhood of your business, but when people get together and all want to do the same thing, they form the entity. It's a separate thing that we treat differently under the law, and that's what they form. It's relatively new. There have been corporations forever. Romans had corporations. The word for it was like a collegium, so you can imagine what that was. It was universities. Things like religious groups were the original corporations. They were treated as sort of a separate entity that wasn't just the person. It was the church, capital C church, were some of the earliest corporations that they had. This is a graph that tries to show sort of the rise of corporations, and they're starting to kind of slough off in how much influence they have, but they really only started in about 1600 in Italian shipping, believe it or not. When people wanted to get together, pool some of their capital and use it to do the same thing, that's when this sort of idea of the corporation came out. And then it progressed from there. It turned into some of the earliest corporations that you know of are like the East India Company. And these things all needed a royal charter. They were really enmeshed with the government. So the government had to give you a special license to operate as a company. And so you have these charters that set out the purposes of it, the rights and powers that you were given by the government so that you were able to operate, and it wasn't just the person or the group of people that were working together. It was this separate entity that was called a company. So the reason that you want to have a company, this is just a cartoon, obviously, it just says, so if we make the cake, if you want to have your cake and eat it too, you've got to make the shell corporation, the corporation owns it, and that's why you're able to have it and eat it at the same time. So there are some benefits that we have to incorporation, to being treated as a separate entity, and especially under the laws that we have now. So it has limited liability. And when we talk about limited liability, it means if someone sues the corporation, or if the corporation goes bankrupt or has too many debts to satisfy, they can't come after the people that are the owners of the corporation separately. So this was hugely important for like the East India Company. If they lost a ton of money, the people who were stockholders didn't want to have their own personal assets get forfeited for those things. They wanted to keep that liability limited to the company. So that's why they do it now. At the same time, you also have it go the other way, so that if someone comes after you personally for all of your assets, they're able to they'll get your house, they'll get your car, but if you own part of a company, they're not going to get all of the assets of the company that you kind of own in reverse. So there is some limits on the liability that goes the other way. And there are some limitations on that we can get into, but it's not that important for you guys. Now there are also tax advantages. The way that they tax corporations are different than the way that they tax you. We'll talk about that too, and how you might be able to use that to your advantage. I'm not a tax attorney. It's a very specialized area, but I know the considerations that we're going to be talking about. And then it's the unlimited lifetime. Those things can go forever. You can sell your ownership in it. It doesn't have to be the same person, obviously, that runs the business. Other people can do those things. You can transfer it. If you want to retire, that's always a good thing. You're able to raise capital. That will be important. If you can sell shares of the company or rights to the profits of the company, that's how you're able to get the money in order to start your business. And it gives you a certain amount of credibility. So if people know that you have a company and it's not just you or your name or even a DBA, a doing business as, they will take you more seriously.
Quick question for you, Mr. Profit.
Go.
For the credibility side, do you have to, is it wise to have the incorporation so that way you can work for the federal government or in the government as well?
So LLCs can work for the government too. We'll talk about that a little bit in the different kinds of things that you can do. Corporations, so credibility is something that applies to different niches in different ways. So it depends on who you're trying to impress or what they're looking for in whether it's investors, whether it's other people, whether it's people who are trying to buy a product or whatever. In the vast majority of circumstances, it won't matter what kind of business that you are. People don't really care. What they care about are your products and your services. The sort of background stuff relates to investors a lot. So the owners, the investors, and what kind of benefits can go to them, that's what the different corporate entities and the types that you can be will really talk to. And so that's who's going to care about what kind of different entity you are, those people who are going to buy it and where it will matter to them. Did that make sense? Did that answer the question? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So there were some downsides to incorporation. You've probably seen this. One, there are high barriers to entry. They've been higher, now they're lower, thank heavens. But especially for, capital C corporation, to be a C corporation, there are formalities that you have to go through in order to do that. There are a lot of special rules and just things that you need to be aware of in order to be a corporation. And making sure that you do those things can be costly to maintain and operate. So Now we have LLCs, and I'll get to those in a second. But before that, really, you just had big corporations that needed to deal with the government directly in order to get incorporated, and that was it. So to have things that weren't quite a full corporation, but were kind of, that allowed people to create their businesses, these incorporated entities kind of grew up from the common law to allow people to operate without going the whole hog incorporation. So the first one is a sole proprietorship. So to put it back in the time frame, consider like your average, so your blacksmith, right? So the blacksmith wanted to operate as Ye Old Blacksmith instead of under his name. So he'd hang a shingle, it would say Ye Old Blacksmith, and that was his trade name that he operated under. He might have an apprentice that would take it over, but really it was him that owned the thing. He was the guy, it was all his business, but it operated sort of separately. And so that's the sole proprietorship. It still exists now. There's nothing, you can't like register for a sole proprietorship. It's something that kind of grows up around someone who is just a person doing business as themselves offering services. There aren't any limitations on personal liability here. You don't get a lot of the same benefits that you will over corporation. So they're very, very rarely used. The only circumstances really where I've seen this used is people like realtors, where they're operating completely by themselves and they want to have a different name or something with it, and they don't need to incorporate really. They can just do a sole proprietorship, but even then there aren't a ton of reasons to do it. So if it's not just one person, you want people to group together to do something, there are partnerships. There's two general flavors of partnerships. There's general partnerships and limited partnerships. A general partnership is where everyone has the same status within the partnership. So it's like the sole proprietorship, but with lots of people. Each of the partners all are at risk for any liabilities that the company enters into. So if the company goes bankrupt, everyone in it can have their stuff. People can come after their stuff as well. A limited partnership happened when partners came in, they pooled some of their capital, but they assigned one other person to run the thing. So there was one limited partner or one general partner or the managing partner, and then the other partners were called limited partners. That did have some advantages in that the limited partners who didn't run the thing, they didn't have the same personal liability that the managing partner did. Again, all of these things are things that just sort of happen on the way that you operate. You don't need to file anything to have this. There are some tax advantages that you can do on this, but I won't get into them just because no one really does any of these things. Really, I just want people to know there are these unincorporated entities that you might be in right now, depending on how you're operating, but most people in the business world file something to get away from this because they have very limited advantages. So a recent kind of innovation really that tries to take all of the advantages of the corporation without all of the costs of the corporation is the limited liability. And most states have some version, have a limited liability company statute. They are all a little bit different. So for example, in California, to file for a limited liability company can cost you several $100s, and there are lots of, there are at least some things that you have to do annually. You have to file some things annually with the Corporation Commission in order to have that limited liability company. In Arizona, we're really lucky. It costs $85 to set up a limited liability company. That's essentially nothing. The requirements that we have on an annual basis are essentially nothing, and it offers a ton of flexibility. So they're easy to set up. It's called a pass-through entity, which means that your company itself will never be taxed. It will distribute, money will come into the limited liability company, and then it will be distributed to the owners, their members, and that's where it gets taxed. So it'll be taxed only to the individuals who receive money from the company. So the benefit there is now everything that you spend for the company is a write-off, right? Whereas before, if you didn't have that company there, it's all just general income. Every cent that comes in is just income. You're taxed on that, whether or not you're using it to buy other things that contribute to the company or not, or to your business venture. So as a pass-through entity, yes, all of the money eventually gets taxed to you personally, but only the net money, not the gross money. Whereas if you didn't have that, the gross money is what you're going to be taxed on. It does have some asset protection, and by this kind of asset protection, I'm talking about if someone comes after you personally, they only have a limited ability to then get to the assets of the company once you're all out of money. And those are called charging orders. They can ask for a charging order in court that would allow them to get some money that you are owed out of the LLC, but that's really their entire recourse to getting any money out of the LLC. So it hides that from the creditors of the individual members, or not hides it, but protects it, I guess, from the creditors of the members of the LLC. These are 90% of the time when someone comes in and says they want to start a business entity, we tell them to do an LLC. They're extremely flexible. They're really commonly used. The only downside is, so the income is active, which means when the income comes into that business, you can't just reinvest it in the business and have it not be taxed. It's going to be taxed that year. And so we'll talk about corporations, which are different in that if the money comes in, if it's not out as a dividend, it'll stay within the company and still not be taxed. That's called passive income. So active income, it's going to come in, it's going to be taxed that year, the net will anyway. There's only one class of shares, so you can't have anyone that is preferred over anyone else. That limits your ability to fundraise, to get investment, so it's not great for venture capital. Which brings us back to corporations. So the big C corporations, there are 3 different flavors. The main one that the first one that most people think of when you think of a corporation is the C corporation. So this is the one that does have some requirements that you have to do, as far as like you have a board of directors that is going to run the company. You have to have a document that's out how the company is going to be run. You have to do annual meetings that will take place. There are some things that you do have to do, but it also allows the most tax advantages as far as deductions for fringe benefits. So benefits that go to the employees of the corporation are all going to be deducted, whereas not all of them will be for an LLC. So most public and venture-backed companies will go with the C corporations. So what typically we will see then is small companies will come in, and unless they are already looking for venture capital, they will come in, we'll start them as an LLC. And even some that are looking for venture capital will start as an LLC. You can then convert your LLC into a C corporation, and then you're off and running. You can go public and do anything else you want. So another type of corporation is an S corporation. This one has the same taxation as an LLC. It's really just an election. You don't register your company you don't start a company that's an S corporation. You would start a company or an LLC typically, and you would elect for it to be taxed as an S corporation. So usually these are set up for tax advantages. For your guys' purposes as a small business, people usually set up an S corp if they're making enough money on their own that they don't want to pay self-employment taxes. So it makes sense for them to go through and jump through the hoops that they set up the S corporation. If you then have to pay yourself a reasonable compensation to the owners as W-2 income, and on that amount of that you pay to your owners, that amount will have the self-employment tax on it, or will be taxed with things like Social Security that everyone has to pay. The rest of it will go out as a dividend, essentially, that will not be taxed on the company. It will not require self-employment taxes. It will just be taxed to the individuals that receive them. So it'll go out as a dividend. It'll be regular income for those people. And so they're able to get that money in without the self-employment tax. It makes sense for people like accountants and lawyers. Frankly, a lot of us have S corporations, so that the money that comes in, we pay ourselves a reasonable compensation, and then everything else gets as a dividend so that you're only taxed on that amount as normal income, not as self-employment income that you have to pay taxes on. There's some limitations on it. S corporation has to be less shareholders. You can't have any foreigners. Like the company has to be domestic, meaning it has to be set up in somewhere in the United States. It can't be a foreign corporation. It can't have any foreign owners. It can't have any foreign national shareholders or non-resident alien shareholders. So if you're doing business with someone overseas, you can't have an S corp with them. And it also has to have unanimous shareholder consent. So if anyone in the corporation doesn't want it to be taxed as an S corporation, you can't be an S corporation. And then there are nonprofit corporations, and this only exists in some states. Arizona is one of them. You can set up as a nonprofit corporation. It will help you somewhat with the federal IRS and your taxes to get set up and be recognized as tax exempt, so that you don't have to pay taxes because you're a charitable organization, or for whatever other reason that you can fit as a tax exempt organization. You can start as a nonprofit corporation. They're very, very similar to the requirements of a C corporation. It just is a C corporation that loves animals or whatever. So it isn't actually set up very different. It's not that different from a lot of things. It just is. It's something that a lot of states have. You usually don't want to be a nonprofit corporation unless you're trying to establish that kind of tax status with the IRS, and then it looks good to do that. But other LLCs can do that. So that's sort of just the broad outline. That's all I really wanted to give you today, is to see corporations are these legal fictions. There are a couple of different things. Really, you can Google those things and find out most of that information. The main point, I guess, is set up your LLC. That's what you're going to do in the vast majority of cases. Spend the $85, set up your LLC. You can pay an attorney. We do single member LLCs. So if it's just one person, we'll charge $600 to set that up for them. And then we'll give you, it's called an operating agreement, which means it has all the rules that the LLC has to operate under, which can be useful. And then we do a series of different contracts for you too. So like a non-disclosure agreement, a service agreement, so that you can offer different services or contracts. But it's really the most basic form of companies that you can do. If you have partners, you definitely want to set up an LLC that has multiple members. That way you will have to do an operating agreement that will set forth things that you wouldn't think about. Like what happens when someone dies? Where do their shares go to? Can you do a buyout, or does it automatically go to their heirs? How does that all work? Those are things that you're going to want to set out. One that is dear to my own heart is patent ownership. So intellectual property especially will really, you want to have that separate entity, because all of the value in the intellectual property, you don't want that to be spread between all of the members of your partnership or the people that are running the thing. You want it in one place. That is where it can be sold. It can be capitalized on. You can monetize it in different ways. Your intellectual property all needs to be owned by one person, or you can't. Your ability to use it in any way becomes much more limited. So I'm still talking even after I said any questions. So I really do want to get back to people. What questions do you have that I can answer about any of that or anything else?
I'll ask a first question, Clark. Because I'm a teacher, I teach business at MCC.
Yeah.
I was surprised to hear you say that. Well, I wasn't surprised to hear you say sole proprietorship is not very common anymore. That there's probably good reasons for that. Limited liability is obviously one of them. Yeah. I was surprised though that you said that partnerships are not so common anymore. Is that because LLCs have basically made partnerships dispensable, or?
Yes, right. So before the LLC, you saw a lot of partnerships because corporations were unwieldy for that number of people. And you wanted to be flexible with ownership in the partnership. And so they generally would operate just as a partnership. And there was some different lawyering that ended up going around those, even though you couldn't set it up as a separate entity. You could have different agreements around those to tell how they were run specifically. But yeah, now that you have the LLC really is flexible enough to do anything that your forms of partnership before could also do, and have the limited liability and more recognized law around them that are treated the same way in different states and things, that it is much more common now to set it up as an LLC rather than as a partnership.
I also was curious when you were showing that slide, you had partnership, and then you had, I'll let you get to it there, LLP and LLLP. What are those?
Liability partnerships, and I forget what that third L is.
That's so, what I couldn't figure it out either.
A limited liability limited partnership.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, there's a great deal of overlap in those terms on what those actually mean. The limited liability comes from the way that the limited partnership was structured. So the managing partner shouldered really most of the liability on that, and the other partners ran with much more limited liability. And so really those are almost like different names of what you call it rather than.
Okay, so I kind of knew that limited liability partnership was basically the investor was only liable to the amount of investment he had in the company. Right. So if he had a 10% investment, he only had 10% liability. But
that's right.
Yeah, I do have some questions as well, but I wanted to ask if Myra and Taryn had any questions before I jumped in and unloaded.
I did have a question. For the LLC, you said that you have to get taxed on that. Does that mean that you get taxed on what you take out as your income as well as what the company makes through the year?
So not as well. Rather, you get taxed on what you take out of the company and just what you take out of the company.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, but you can't. Sort of, with one kind of small wrinkle in there, that you can't just leave money in the LLC and not get taxed on it. To do that, you have to have a corporation. So if you made $100,000, $100,000 in income came into the LLC, $20,000 of it was spent on materials or whatever else to run the thing, and you paid yourself $50,000, you would be taxed on the $50,000 plus the 30 grand that's left over after you spent the 20, right? So you'd be taxed on the full $80,000, not the 50.
Okay.
Okay.
On that slide, when you were showing that, you also said, or you could elect to be taxed as a corporation.
That's certainly what my business is I'm set up as a standing 360 LLC, the limited liability company, taxed as an S corporation.
Yes. So that's how a lot of lawyers, that's how we're set up too. And so the way that works, all of the money that comes in to your LLC, it is the money that you have to operate in the business. You spend whatever you spend on your employees, on your materials, on whatever expenditures you have, you spend on that. For your employees, you have to pay it. So say, are you just a single member LLC, Kevin? Is it just you? Okay. So, and you're the only employee. So what your business does is it's paying you like you're a normal employee. You have a W-2 income that you get from the business. It's Correct. Not all of the money that comes into the business. It's all it has to be is a reasonable compensation, which usually is set very low, but it's a little bit flexible in that the IRS will look at the market, different things that you can make, whatever it counts as reasonable compensation. I will say for us, for lawyers, the IRS will let us get away with fairly low compensation because people like public defenders and things like that are paid less. So then a reasonable compensation can be a lower amount. So I think it's like 35 grand or something that our salary is. And so on that money, we have to pay Social Security, all the other employment taxes that come out. The rest of it that then gets dispensed to you is not taxed as self-employment income. It's just regular income to you. So whatever your tax rate is, if it's 15, 25, whatever that is, that's how it gets taxed, but no additional federal tax, FICA tax, Social Security tax, none of that comes out of that money.
Correct. Yeah, that's how I have it currently set up. So and rather than going through like a payroll company like Paychex or something where it was like a large monthly fee, because my company is so small, it's just me, I can pay myself adequately. I have it set up so that I'm like taking the taxes out myself and then paying the taxes myself. So that way the business account can hold the money and have the money to pay and run the business, buy the supplies, buy the material, whatever I need. And then for myself, I'm just paying myself as a normal employee because I also work as a normal employee for another company.
Yeah.
That's how I have to kind of set up.
Yep. And so do you use a CPA, Kevin?
No.
It's
I know. I have a family filing taxes for like 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And then I've worked with a lot of people to where what I'm actually trying to work in now is a deal of trade of services.
Okay.
It's often try to prefer with people working.
Yeah. And so your CPA,
yeah.
If you work with a CPA, your CPA will usually set that up for you so that they can get, if you want to have like automatic deposits that come in as your salary, whatever, if you want to run that all yourself, you can. It's a little bit complex, but if you need to do your books, then that is something that they will also handle for you.
So Clark, are the benefits the same? Like operational expenses obviously are expenses for the company, so those are write-offs. Those aren't considered income. But what I'm hearing is any money you make above and beyond the actual set salary is then additionally taxed by the owners, huh?
Right. It has to get taxed somewhere. Like death and taxable applies, right? It has to get taxed. But instead of it gets taxed less. It just has that personal level of taxation. It doesn't have the additional employment taxes that typically are tacked on. Like when you get your paycheck, you have your pay stub and the amount that comes out as taxes. It will only be the small amount that goes to your federal withholding. That's all that will end up being paid on those taxes. Everything else does not.
If you don't mind me, what I thought it kind of sums it up to be is you have a one big chunk, say the company gets a large amount of money, you kind of break up the funds. So it's rather than paying a large amount of taxes on that one large sum, you kind of break it in half. So it's like two medium tax.
Sure, yeah. Really, you break it into two, and then the one has extra taxes, and you try to make that one that has extra taxes as small as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of the difference then between an LLC and a corporation. That it's an important difference is that income for the company becomes income for the owner. So,
right. So that's what we're talking about when we say pass-through taxation. Yes.
You're right.
So income from the company is counted as income for the owner. Yeah. But I wouldn't say that that's a difference between a corporation and an LLC, because like Kevin was saying, his company is an LLC that is taxed as an S corporation.
Right.
So you can't.
No, I understand that. Yeah. If you add that second caveat. Yeah.
Now I did have a question for you, Mr. Provitt. You said that you can't start a company as an S corporation. Is that like, so you can't be like, oh, I'm starting this company and it's an S corporation, no limited liability, no C corp or anything like
that? I guess what I mean by that is there's not like a separate part in the state law that says these are the type of corporations that you can start. One is a C corporation and one is an S corporation. It's not really like that. They have different parts, and there's a C corporation and there's an LLC. And then you start one of those, and usually you'll start an LLC, and then you'll say, my LLC is an S corporation. It's an election. So you file, you register your LLC, and then you just elect it to be taxed as an S corporation.
Okay, so I did do it right. I was just making sure that the logic of it was correct.
The way those
Clark, why would you not do that? Why would you not?
So sometimes it doesn't make sense because there are some, like you have to split it out and pay your own W-2 taxes, or you can open yourself up for tax liability to the federal government, and that is never fun. So it gets complicated. If you don't want to deal with that complexity, then you wouldn't split it up, right? So really, if you have a small business and you're making, and it's making you like 20 grand a year or something, and that's all that it makes, it may not be worth it to you to have the administrative hassles that come with making it an S corporation and paying yourself a salary and having this different money and running it separately. It may be just easier to not set it up as an S corp and just run it all as regular income and still, so you'd still have to pay the self-employment taxes on the entire amount that's coming into that LLC.
I think the difference as well for the S corp for yearly wise, for the LLC, you can just pay the taxes once at the end of the year. While an S corp, you have to pay quarterly tax.
Quarterly, yeah, right. You have to set that right. So that's part of those administrative hurdles.
The difficult stuff. But yeah.
If you don't set it up as an S corp, basically you're paying for not being able to do those those administrative hurdles by paying extra taxes.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing is if I don't do an S corporation, then all the money in the company is going to be marked as personal income, which means you're paying all those additional taxes on all that money. Whereas if you pay yourself a salary.
Right, so personal income and self-employment income.
Right, that's what I'm talking about. And so, if you pay yourself a salary, just say $50,000 a year as opposed to $100,000 that you might make in your company, then you've paid $50,000 more in those extra taxes that you wouldn't have paid. So
exactly right. And so, what is the self-employment tax? It's something like 9%, maybe. I should know this, but it's that kind of number. So if 9% of 50 grand is a substantial amount, if you think that's enough to pay, if you're okay paying that amount to get out of all the hassle, then you wouldn't set up the S corp.
Let's be honest though, Clark, what are we talking about hassle? We're talking about quarterly filings. We're talking about a few administrative rules, but is it really, I mean, we're not talking about 100 hours a year in additional.
No, so I wouldn't say it's 100 hours a year, but what it is it's front loaded to where you have to educate yourself enough about the tax laws to know that you're doing everything right.
That even exists as an option.
No, that's your job.
Well, so paying me might cost more, or your CPA really is whose job it is. But paying me or your CPA might cost more money than you're going to save in that extra employment tax if you're making a small amount. And so it wouldn't make sense there. But for people making substantial money in their own business, an S corporation usually will make sense.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But Myra, do you have any questions?
You can go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm ridiculous with this stuff because I'm someone who's done with virtual stuff all the time, so I feel like I'm in the room with you and I've prepared for this. Obviously, I've done some work. Dan, I did do all of the hard work of trying to do the S corporation, and it is a little bit more difficult, especially for your single person. If I talked to myself 2 years ago, I would say don't do an S corp yet, for sure. Probably just stay with an LLC. Because I was sat where I was like, I made 20 grand and I'm like, oh, that's not really enough to pay myself throughout the whole year. And it was like, anyways, I complicated it. Now, you guys as the lawyer company, like you guys are lawyers and you guys cover all these different things. Do you guys also, like you said at the beginning, we kind of rent you guys rather than paying you like full-time wages to do this? Is it something where like we're getting documents sent to us to sign to work as a distributor for someone, or doing different things to where we're setting up our own, like my company at Spanning 360 said it needs to have something signed before I go and take photos of a place, or because I'm going to be taking their brand's name and then posting it, and then also kind of taking their name myself because it's my photo. So there's some like entertainment laws or copyright stuff.
Yep.
Could you kind of elaborate a little bit on that? Because I know the legality of the business side. So this
Right.
is my legal questions with my.
No, I get it. So the way that ours particularly works, and for that sort of thing, the plan that we would have you under is it's $1,500 a month. So if you have that much that you're doing, it would make sense to do something like that. What happens is when any of those situations arise, you would just kick it over to us and say, well, for one thing, you would say, I need an agreement that I can send to my customers that is like a services agreement that I would normally do. I want you to make that for me. That would be included in your $1,500. If you have these additional things that come up, like these copyright issues or whatever, one, you can get on the phone with us and talk it through with us. Two, if you wanted to adjust all of that, any of that contract language, we would do that. I mean, that would be included in all of that in your monthly kind of fee. And so any legal questions that came up with us, and we'd give you an answer, or we'd have to refer it out in certain circumstances, right? So if you had something that we're not able to handle, we'd refer it out. But really, absent like a big unusual request, all of your kind of day-to-day things and those things that you all talked about, I would consider day-to-day would just be included in that base amount. So you would know exactly what you're paying a month. You would pay that. If you have a low amount, you'd still be paying the $1,500. That kind of sucks. If you have a busy month where you have a lot of legal work, you'd still be paying just the $1,500. So it's nice. So that's how that one is meant to work. And hopefully what we want to try to get out of that is that you call us immediately, whether or not you think it's a big deal or not, right? So that it removes any barrier to you looking for that legal service, so that you're really getting the most out of your attorney. And you have.
But the way to think about it, it's not when you get sued. It's if, or sorry, it's not if you get sued. It's when you get sued. Like it's
right. So
being as a business, be expected to be sued at least some point in time. And a big portion of my business is not just taking photos of people's places, but it's actually technical consulting. So a lot of times I'm going to various businesses and recommending things they should do with their own company, their own resources and assets. So I would very much like to cover my own business's assets for sure.
Hey, Clark, while we're on that topic, then can you share with us, and I'm sure everyone wrestles with this, is tell us when we should contact a lawyer and when it's okay not to. There's a gray area there, I know, but
there is, and it's a hard question, and it's part of why. So me and my partner, why we started this practice, try to change a little bit, but so it's a cost benefit analysis, right? And it's a risk analysis at the same time. So as a business owner, your learning curve is enormous. There's all kinds of things that you have to learn. There are all kinds of different things that come at you all the time. It's a wide range of issues. And one of the things that you deal with is you don't know what you don't know. And so that's part of the problem. And you have some anxiety over that. So going to an attorney early is usually a good idea, because they'll give you peace of mind, that you know that you've covered all the bases that you can, and they'll help you remove, and then depending on what the lawyer does, they'll remove a lot of the risks that you might see downstream, right? And that can end up saving you a lot of money. And hopefully what we're trying to do is make sure that it will also guide some of your strategic decisions too. So you have your strategy of where you want your business to go. The law can help you get there. And so you know that you're using all of the tools available under the law in order to get there. So if you have more money up front, then you want to go see a lawyer earlier because there's some return on that investment. But as a small business owner, we really do know. We've all three of us, the partners, we've all started businesses and tried to run them. Cash is scarce. You have a limited amount that has to go everywhere. So you have to spend that money where it makes sense. So like some of my most satisfying days as an attorney are when I talk people out of registering their trademark or something because they need to spend that money someplace else. Like sales matter more for sometimes than the trademark does.
So let me give you a specific example, because I'm wrestling with this with my clients now. And this is no reflection on you, and I'm not complaining, but your initial consultation to a client would be $600 to help them to set up their company. And that's fine. I think that's very fair, but
that's not quite accurate, but
okay,
go ahead. Let me finish. Let me go ahead.
But I also, now I have a client who says, I can file my own LLC for $85. Why am I going to spend $600 to go see? Yeah. And I said, well, because like you said, there are things you don't know. You know, have you searched your trade name? Do you know everything is copacetic? So that's where I'm saying, you know, for $85, I can file my LLC. Is that something I should do, or is that something I shouldn't do?
Okay, so that's a risk analysis and a self-evaluation analysis. So you want to be you need to do a cold evaluation of your own competency, right? If it really is something that you feel competent to handle, I tell people all the time to do by them. So copyright law is a big thing. I have never ever filed a copyright for someone because a monkey can do that. You have to file. You can do the thing yourself. You really. And actually on a lot of LLCs, I will tell people at the same time, they should do that. There are times where you can file your LLC yourself. It might even be, especially for those single member LLCs, which is that $600 you're talking about. If you don't find a lot of value in the other agreements that we give as part of that kind of opening package, like the non-disclosure agreement and the service agreements and those other things, file it yourself, man. Like, you can start an LLC. It's not hard. It's not expensive, especially in Arizona. So I guess I'm talking Arizona specific, but for our state where it really is easy, you can do that yourself. And I tell clients that they can do that themselves. When you're looking at the contract language, that's different. Even with things like a non-disclosure, there's a lot of those online. They're not there's not a lot between a very good non-disclosure agreement and a not so good non-disclosure agreement. I'll tell people they can do that on their own if they have, like, if they're confident in their sort of reading comprehension skill and are comfortable with dealing with that complex language. So that's a long-winded way of saying it depends, unfortunately. So it depends how comfortable you are with. You will eliminate the risk by going with an attorney, and you're paying for that. So there's some risk, and you need to make sure that you really do feel comfortable in your own competence. If you know that you struggle with that sort of thing, you should hire an attorney. If you know that you handle stuff like that well, maybe you don't need. One thing that we do, and you mentioned our initial consultation. So the way we do an initial consultation is we charge $750 for an initial consultation. We send you a lot of paperwork, usually with that, it's like a questionnaire and a self-evaluation of your business. If you answer the questionnaire and give it back to us, we'll waive the fee for consultation. So it's free if you do the right. So, and that's how we operate. A lot of attorneys will do a free initial consultation. We don't call it a free initial consultation, but essentially it is. So if you came in to me, for example, and said, I want to set up a single member LLC, this is what I'm doing, this is what I want to do with it, what we will do is have the meeting, our initial consultation will be more strategies. We will set out what we think you should do, like what we think you need. If you need to set up the LLC, what kind of agreements you might want to have. And then we'll tell you, this is what it would cost for us to do it. You can also do it. I tell people that they can do it themselves. If you feel that you can do that, you can. But there's our cost for it, right? And what we try to be, and what good attorneys I feel try to be, is someone who is advising you to help you use the law as a tool to get where you need to be, including using your lawyers as a tool to get where you need to be. You don't need a power tool for everything. You can use a handsaw and it works, and you can get there.
Well, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, and I know I did, because that's a tough question.
It's a good question.
But what I usually tell my students is, if you're thinking about starting a business, use the professionals who know how to start a business. Go see your lawyer, go see your CPA, go see these people, because they're the experts who can help you avoid errors. So, but that is a question that comes up all the time. Well, so when do I need to go see a lawyer, and when can I do it myself? So
yeah, so, and to abbreviate the answer, as early as possible for a strategic meeting, right?
I like that.
And then whether or not you need to use them for the rest of it, it is a much more complicated question that's kind of, that strategic meeting should clarify for you. You should be able to discuss with the professional what the pros, cons, risks, benefits are of doing it yourself or using them. And if it's worth the money to you, use them. Don't. But,
Sounds
but
good
the
to me.
consultation, the initial consultation, especially if you can get it for cheap or free, is a good idea to do earlier. Because of that, you don't know what you don't know. And so if the professionals can clarify that for you, then at least you can have an idea of what your risks and abilities are, and you can make informed decisions as opposed to ignorant ones.
Thank you. Back to you, Kevin.
I know.
Don't limit your questions to just the business stuff. If you have a question on anything, I will try to answer as best I can.
My dog bit, but no, I'm kidding.
Yeah, doctor.
It's not so a lot of the stuff that I do is really common knowledge. Like you said, it's Googleable. All the SEO digital nonsense out there for marketing a business online. So there's no trade secrets to what I do. It's just going out there and doing the, hard to read and hard to find kind of stuff. Since there's no really business trade secrets, since there's no anything that's not already publicized, if you will, is there any reason to get the documents signed beforehand before starting to work with companies for, not just to collect payment for people, but it is word of mouth contract. Hey, I need you this done. Oh, I can do this for you. Let me do this real quick for you. And then just a quick handshake. Is that not suitable? Because a lot of the times because I know a lot of technical stuff, I like keeping things really basic. So, trade of service agreements and that kind of stuff. Hey, shake my hand, I'll do this for you. You do that for me. Where is the line really there?
All right, Kevin, I'm gonna do the first response on that, and then Clark, you elaborate on that. Yeah. I had a Vietnamese employee one time, and I would go out and I would tell him how to do something, and he would look me back and he'd say, "Write it down." He didn't want any verbal instructions, because when you have a verbal instruction, you can always go back and say, "That's not what you told me."
Different interpretations of it.
Now, go ahead, Clark. You can really answer it.
I mean, that will remove uncertainty to have everything written. So it's another one that's kind of complex. The thing is, it will be fine in the vast majority of cases, right? Because people really are, for the most part, honest, for the most part, are trying to fulfill their obligations, and most contracts that you enter into are win-wins. I mean, they're things that both parties have agreed to that are wins for everybody, and so most people will try to fulfill those. It's in that there's a small percentage of cases where things go to hell, and those can be extremely expensive, and can open. And so there's for you in particular, one of the things you need to worry about is that you do actually is who owns the copyright of the photos that you take, right? If you're taking pictures or doing other things, whoever owns the copyright in that photo matters. that's probably something you want in writing so that everyone is clear on. You can get away with just a verbal, but if it comes in the after and people are pissed and they end up leaving you a 1-star, review or something, there can be consequences, right? So
Yeah.
even just to have it be clear between everyone, there can be reasons to enter into more formal agreements. And there can be things like that are kind of lurking that written agreements will typically handle that verbal agreements don't. And so it's a risk analysis, unfortunately. So you can go on that. It's easier to do. It's more convenient to do. A lot of people, if your agreements are simple, fair, and have considered a lot of those things, then you get kind of the best of both worlds. You have, it doesn't take that much to have a written agreement, go over it with the other party and sign it real quick, right? It's an hour maybe, but it'll remove a lot of those risks. It'll remove a lot of those uncertainties and ambiguities, and you can do it. So it matters how you do it too, because your agreements do need to be somewhat simple and easy to understand too. If you overcomplicate it, no one's going to do that, right?
Yeah, no one wants to work with you. You get a 10 page,
so,
say sign here, sign here, sign here. I'll take a picture for you now. Yeah.
Right. You don't need that. You just don't. Right. So only do the agreements. You want to think through your stuff, know what you need and don't need, and then reduce it to as simple a thing as possible, and then have some formality around it because it just makes things clear. But clarity is more important than formality. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As long as everyone is clear on all of the issues surrounding your transaction, then you are most likely going to be okay. Whether that's in a document or not, it just usually becomes easier to do that in a document because documents are more clear and you can spend more thinking about them. And so that's why you would go through the formality to get to the clarity.
Perfect.
Clark,
Go ahead.
Clark, I noticed we're out of time, but
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fine with sticking around.
I had 2 comments, and the last question was, if I do have documents that I want like a lawyer to look over, what is the cost of that? And then the second comment statement that I had was, your beard is awesome, and kudos to you.
That is all I wanted in the world. So when I was in high school, I read this interview. It was with Lane Staley, and who's the lead singer of Alice in Chains, and he had a story about he had a beard braided with a bone in it, and it got in his soup in an airplane. I don't even remember where I read that, but it's like a life goal for me to grow a beard long enough to braid it with a bone in it. Anyway, you don't need to know that. Thank you. What was the other question?
How much does it cost?
To have you
There it is.
documents?
I totally forgot that in my beard enthusiasm. So for what we will usually do is it's we will charge $450 to review a contract, give you look over everything, and give you an email that has points of anything that we notice that might be an issue, and have a phone call about it to clarify everything. If you want us to go through it and redline it, so basically redraft it to do everything that you want it to do, that would be an additional $450. So it's usually $900 to go through and redline it, to edit it to look like something else. So that's just what we charge. I'm sure other people do it differently. We're not the cheapest in the world. We're not the most expensive in the world. We try to give you as much value as we can, but that's what we charge.
Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Taryn, anything else that you want to ask?
No, that's all been really, really helpful. Kevin asked some really good questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good. I'm glad to be helpful. Yeah, so if you have any other questions, so our website is hpslawgroup.com. My email is just clark@hpslawgroup.com. I'm happy to answer general questions. If you have quick questions, I'm not going to make you pay for that. I will do things. So, and I'm happy to do that. Like being a lawyer sometimes feels like we're just pushing paper for the man, or you know, that lawyers are generally evil. So when we can use our powers for good, that is rewarding for me personally. So if you have questions that I can answer, I'm usually happy to do that. And then if we have to charge you money, I'll let you know, but typically I'm happy to answer questions. So please reach out if I can do anything for you.
Thank you very much, Clark. You really kind of cleared things up for me, especially. And yeah, no, I'll give you a clap. That was
Thank you. That's what I was going for.
All right, Clark, I'll let you go. Thank you very much for doing this. We appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll all be in touch with you in some form or another.
All right.
I think I have rights to close this, don't I?
Yeah, I think Bob just totally left the meeting altogether.
No, yeah, he did. But we knew he was leaving.
Oh, okay.
All right. Thanks, guys. I'll end it.
See you later, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks so much, Dan. Have
You
a good
bet,
weekend.
You too.
My birthday on Saturday.
Myra.
So fun, right?
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Have a good week, guys.
I'm not saying happy birthday to you.
Let's see how it is. Fine. I'll talk to you before Saturday then, because that's when it is. So I better get something.
Okay. Bye.
Stay connected to Mesa Chamber social media, email newsletters, Monday morning message, and mesachamber.org to always know what's happening at your Mesa Chamber.